Welcome to another episode of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. Welcome to another edition of the Carry Trainer Higher Line podcast. I've got my buddy CJ Ortiz, the Metal Motivator, singular, not plural.
That's right. There's only one.
It's fun to actually sit and chat and see your face. We've had a few phone calls over the last year.
Yes, we have. Yeah. Very in-depth. What's funny about that, and I'll say this, I'm sure your listeners already know you, and those who attended your classes probably know this already. It's not hard for you to get intense real quick. And for the two conversations I think we had, that it took about 30 seconds to get super in-depth. And then and when we stopped on a dime, it was just, hey, I got to go. Bye. Then the next time was the same thing. So yeah, you're my tribe for sure, man.
As my wife and I talked about that last night at dinner, because she is a big wig. She wouldn't like me to say that at her company, and people always, they either perceive her to be a bitch, which if she heard me saying this, I'd be in trouble, or she's very blunt. And it's because years of communicating with people, it's like, what's the point of wasting words? Let's talk about what we can talk about.
Yeah, as a one scholar said, why waste words on the willfully deaf?
Yeah, willfully deaf. That's pretty good. I'll need to write that one down. Yeah, I think it's the art of communication, or even just to have a regular conversation with family or a loved one. It's to actually get the point across. It seems like the world would be a much better place if we could get to that point instead of all that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I actually posted one of my quotes a little while ago that I tweeted, and then I posted it on Instagram, and it was, just a little while ago. It said, truth is objective, but not everybody hears the truth objectively.
That's too true.
And it's so common, because I'll often have these conversations with people, and they'll say, oh, my ex says, I told her, and it was this and this and this and this, and dude, I don't understand why she doesn't or why he doesn't. I'm like, hey man, people are hearing their own truth,
Right.
You've got to deal with the fact that is the way they perceive it. And, this has been obviously multiplied exponentially via social media. And so what we see on display is really not the collision of ideas at all. We see the collisions of interpretations and perceptions, and so it's distortion banging against distortion, and there's no surprise as to why we're in the mess that we are.
That's a good point. Oftentimes people will say things like these broad statements like, well, that's the internet for you, or that's social media. And I often, and after just hearing what you said, I think I kind of changed my stance a little bit. I oftentimes will say, well, that's silly because it's still humans communicating.
You're exactly right.
But to your point, it's a little different than, there's no vocal inflection oftentimes when it's typing. There's no facial response. There's no body language. And you can't say, wait, excuse me a second, let me say this. Or, hey, good point. It's these choppy little snippy bits, and I just thought about that. There's a lot of ego injected too, because we say something and it's gone, but we type it and we can sit and make it perfect and hone it just as cutting or crass or
it's funny. This goes across the board. When you have, for example, a political opponent, it's easy to label them as them and they. The more you depersonalize somebody, the easier it is to, attach evil attributes to them, the easier it is to hate them, because they are the impersonal them. Mm-hmm. And you see that again online, because all you see is the little blue name on Facebook and the little tiny profile picture, same thing, maybe Instagram or whatever. It's just easy to depersonalize somebody, because that way you're more justified in your own mind without any trouble from your own conscience to hate them. Whereas if you see them in person, then things become very personal. And when it's personal, very difficult to act that way.
And you see people get supercharged with emotion in that setting, where it's easy just to type something, F you, you're an a-hole, but to say that in person, you see their body tense up, their voice gets high pitch or low pitch, they grit their teeth.
Oh yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, for me, I mean, to me, whenever any sort of exchange, whether personal or on social media, begins to default to pejoratives, name calling, and the like, then I know I've won.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're out of arguments, so it's, let's resort to calling names, because that's, somehow you think your last resort is to hurt my feelings, and man, good luck with that.
I just had a discussion lunch yesterday with a bunch of politicians, and we were talking about bloggers. There's a local blog in my community that's read by hundreds of thousands of eyes a year, and the people that comment all use fake names, and they hide behind the screen, and they'll say some of the most hateful, I mean, just like disgusting things. There's a young girl that just got appointed to a county office, and somebody wrote under a fake name, they wrote how this woman is like a gutter trash whore. And I'm thinking, this girl has daughters, she has a husband, and you start thinking about it and looking at what you just said, the name calling. It's like, well, they have nothing real of any value to say. They're jealous that this girl's got this nice job that she worked hard for. They don't maybe like some of her political leanings, so now they attack her physical looks, or they attack her family, or her, and it is so silly. So occasionally I'll comment, and I sign my name, Mickey Shook, and people will maybe throw some mud back, and this is once a year. And my response usually is, if you're not willing to use your own name, or at least be known, I'm not even going to listen to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's the verse that says, "Father, forgive them; they know not what they do." And I find that's the case, because I'll often say, no matter what somebody's saying, if they had the opportunity to see with their bare eyes the net effect of what they claim, what they're saying, who they're dealing with. Like, again, if they were to see this particular woman around their kids, who their kids are, how much their kids love their mother, etc., would you still, after seeing all of that, would you still say or write the very same thing? Mm-hmm. If so, then I know I'm dealing with someone of hardened heart, and who's really inches away from being a serial killer, because he's just absolutely that cold-hearted. But 99% of the people are going to see all of that, and they're going to say, no, I'm not going to say a word. Sure. So I try to keep that in mind, that that's how people are. And so my thing is, when it comes to dealing with people, is I don't work by reciprocity, ever. You want a life filled with disappointment? Place expectations on anything.
Sure.
Period. So I don't deal with somebody based on how they deal with me. That's the old saying, I treat you like you treat. No, I treat you based on principles that I hold to be true, absolute, and authoritative. I don't respond to flesh, and I'm not doing what I do because of flesh. I do it because this is what makes the world work. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if that's not good enough, well, love your enemy.
Right on.
Either way, man, I'm answering a principle. My response or action towards anybody, no matter what they do, is not based on anything reciprocal. It's based on what the principle is. Mm-hmm. And that's what will give me, in any situation, authority.
That's really what I want. A principle is, right? You're basing your actions on some.
Yeah, I mean, I am never going to be, I couldn't make enough money. I couldn't be popular enough. I couldn't be the president's president and have enough authority to overturn 2 + 2 = 4.
Sure.
So that's it. I mean, even if I'm not here to think it, 2 + 2 still equals 4. So what, it has authority. So there are moral and other principles that have as much authority as 2 + 2 = 4. I'm not in charge of that. It's been here before me. It will be here after me. Life goes better when I just submit myself to it, and I respond to people based on the principle. They can do whatever the hell they like. They'll have to deal with the principle themselves. They'll have to deal with their conscience. They'll have to deal with the consequences that you can't keep being a dick in life and expect to prevail.
Amen.
You can't. So I just say, hey, I'm sticking to the principle. My conscience is clean, and I can sleep at night and hang out with people like Mickey.
I agree with everything you just said. I have caught myself 100 or more times in my life straying from that.
Oh, me too, man.
You lose your shit, and then you're like, damn it. Like, I know better than that. Why did I do that? I let that person.
I just know it, Mickey. I don't do it. I don't live this shit. Oh, I thought we were talking about stuff. We're talking about stuff we live. It's going to be a short conversation.
Let me go get a beer.
Yeah, let's just stick to the stuff I know, not the stuff I do.
I think that's a misconception a lot of times. Like, I've got a big family, so I think sometimes maybe my siblings or family friends or people I grew up with hear or see some of the things that I say or profess. And I personally try to make sure people understand, like, hey, like you just said, I'm not saying I got all this shit locked down, but occasionally I'll hear somebody or somebody will call me and be like, hey, was that you? Like, are you on drugs or like, like what's going on? Because they know I'm not perfect. And that's, I think oftentimes folks, they look at somebody like you or like me or anybody that says, hey, here's something you should think about. And then they look for that chink in the armor, that failure point, which in itself is a huge failure. Yeah,
I try to be careful. I've got many years in marketing and advertising and such, so copywriting is very important to me. And so I'm very sensitive to what I write. And when it comes to some of the quotes that I'll write, like for instance, one I posted this morning is mind over matter, ? Well, as long as the matter we're talking about is our own lazy ass. But notice I didn't say I didn't say you.
Mm-hmm.
As long as the matter we're talking about is our own lazy ass. It gets to be a little when you I think that's a mistake. And this is for anybody out there who tries to teach others or whatever online, like Mickey and myself do. Try not to talk down to people all the time. Put you in there as well. Speak in terms, say, I always try to keep this in mind, or, try not to always talk down or at people. I mean, a lot of people, sometimes it seems like they just want to be told what to do. I get that, but that doesn't mean take advantage of it. Again, you're ruled by principle. Your principle should be, I'm going to set the example no matter what. I know I can manipulate people if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. You know what I mean?
That's true leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's a different kind of leadership. A lot of the stuff is, for you and I, who, when we talk offline, we talk about our mutual backgrounds. And so you and I have, we've gleaned from our spiritual pasts, and a lot that we've learned. I was looking to say it this way. Hey, I don't regret my past. I've learned a million things to do and a million things not to do.
Sure.
Right. But there's so much that I take from it where I think, you realize that, like with what I do, people respond like they do because it's a bit of a shepherding thing. People say coach or motivation. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to use those terms because they're what's understood. The contemporary parlance, it's what's understood and whatever. But, somebody had asked me the other day, how much, whatever it, they wanted to get into coaching. And they said, what's it going to take? And so I thought I'd ask somebody who knew. I said, well, you're barking up the wrong tree because I don't know. I said, I'm not a coach. I'll write it in there, but I said, but I'm really not a coach, dude. I don't sit there and talk to people one-on-one all day, and it would drive me crazy. I said, I'm more of a teacher, and I'm more of a shepherd. And you can throw some prophetic elements in, but I'm more of a teacher and I'm more of a shepherd. In other words, what's important to me is that you become self-governing. So in that sense, you've got to understand that there's authority in principle. So I want to hammer principles, because that's like, for somebody like yourself, right? Failure in the fundamentals is very dangerous, especially with people handling firearms. So you're going to hammer on the most basic principles as if they are the secrets.
Which they are.
Which they are, right?
Yeah.
So you hammer on them and you want them, in a sense, to say, these have authority. You don't work around where you have your finger. You don't work around where your eyes go when you're hard. You don't work around that. It will work against you. You might have gotten away with it a couple times, But like that one video I saw the other day of the guy in the indoor range who
shooting past his
shot behind him, and the guy was walking. Oh, that was the scariest thing I've ever seen, dude.
Yes, cringing.
You know, and now of course he was big and muscular with a ball cap and tattoos. You know, he's got a. I'm sure he has a cool ass Instagram.
Yeah,
right. But that's the problem when you lead with ego. Ego means you think you're bigger than the principles that govern this world. You think you're the exception to the rule. No, you are not the exception to the rule. You fall upon the rock, or the rock falls upon you and breaks you to powder, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't violate the principle. You don't break it. It breaks you. So, for my daughter, my youngest, she came downstairs several months ago, and she said she was just kind of feeling down, and she said, Dad, I challenges with this, challenges with that. And I said, well, what else is bothering you? And she said, well, I'm just a little concerned that maybe you're disappointed with me. And I said, honey, and I'm not that type of dad. I do not browbeat, I do not whatever, but sometimes when you're living with somebody who lives this way, it's by default. You don't have to say a word. They just feel like, well, he's working, I'm not, he's not complaining, I am. So she just felt like, well, I just don't want you to be disappointed with me because I'm having these struggles. I said, honey, unconditional love. I would never, ever, ever think of you that way, ever. I said, but if you really want to make your dad happy, if you really want to please my soul, fall in love with wisdom. Love wisdom, love principles. The principle, if you're feeling bad or you're struggling with something, whatever the principles are that govern achievement and change in that area of life, fall in love with it. Know that it has authority. Know that it can get you out of this. Don't let emotions rule you. Let wisdom rule you. And that means you're going to have to suppress those emotions, which is probably one of the biggest challenges that people have, is they don't realize how emotional they are. And especially guys with muscles. And tattoos and big long beards, the whole 9 yards, man. You guys can be as emotional as anybody else,
or more.
And the reason being is because I'm 5'7", Mickey, and I spent my teenage years growing up in Texas. And I'll tell people all the time, I said, listen, I don't care if you grew up in Watts or Harlem or Chicago. I said, there's a special kind of torment growing up in the suburbs of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, because everybody is 7 feet tall. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there's just that ego in Texas, and they will torment you.
Okay.
So it's a different kind of abuse, if you will, a hazing. And so, but what I realized over the years is that people like that rely upon that. And it's not a very sure foundation. It's like a woman relying upon her beauty. It's like, well, honey, you're going to get older. So don't put too much stock in that. Realize that things are going to droop. Yeah. You're going to have challenges. So don't put your whole thing in that. But guys do that.
There's a quote that I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No. Just you get the gist of it. It's just they don't have that strong inner man.
Part of what my program, the Carry Trainer course, does is we shoot guns. We teach people how to use them to protect themselves or others, but it's a tool to get to what's here, what's inside. Yeah. And usually by the time we're done with a couple days with these guys, I don't have the issue with girls as much because they don't exhibit the same ego problems. But there's a quote, it was from 900 AD, I believe, the Battle of Maldon. It was, there's 50 interpretations of the script, but basically it says this: as our might lessens, our heart and mind must grow the bolder. And this warrior was aging, and he knew, like, all this, the muscles, the swords, the ability to rip bears in half, all that shit will fade. So what do I have? And people have interpreted that. Tolkien, what's his name? There's another
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, he used some of it in his books, but people looked at that and they knew that this guy didn't just mean his ability to physically protect himself. He meant, what is my life beyond my ability to dunk basketballs, lay more broads, make more money. And that's that to me is the culmination of our life. What kind of man do you want to be?
Absolutely. Because I think, and that's part of the reason why I think the world is wired the way that it is, that nothing great ever comes easy, and I think we know now that that journey of pursuit and the trials and the decision making and the confusion and the struggle and the temptation to quit and the long hours and the years, all of these things add up to build the steely character that's able to sustain success once it's reached. So coming from my background with the rock star thing, you got guys discovered they're not able to carry the responsibilities of success because they've never been through anything to build the sort of steely character that could carry that load. And when I grew up in Texas, I learned quickly that the strength or prowess of all of these guys that I met in Texas was surface, and it was ostensible, and it was easily undermined by the mind. In other words, they had weaknesses. They just never had to really deal with them because everybody had to deal with them in terms of their physical stature. And so, nowadays, I've done what I've done now. I have done a lot of counseling and that sort. I don't mean I don't do that when I mention about coaching, but that's not what I am.
People aren't coming to you and saying, "Hey, let me give you $20 an hour to steer me straight and tell me what is wrong."
Yeah, exactly. So, but when I used to do a lot more the public teaching, I would have very massive guys, good guys. I mean, good guys, not assholes or anything like that, but good guys. But they would come and visit and talk. And on more than one occasion, man, I would see eyelids twitching and lips quivering at times. And I would ask them on occasion, it's, you okay? And they go, well, I'm scared I'm going to say something stupid. So, don't worry about it, bro. I'm not. But you're just quiet. CJ, you're not saying anything. You're just looking at me. I just wonder what you're thinking about. Dude, I'm thinking about lunch. Not that deep, man. I'm listening to you, but I'm still thinking about lunch. But in other words, because how you and I met is a great example. We met I went through Pat McNamara of T-Max or Wes Whitlock of Road America.
One or the other. I think Pat.
But it's funny because I watch how people respond to these guys, and granted, they've earned every bit of their respect and that sort of thing. But I do a podcast with Pat. We just did one yesterday. Or was it the Wednesday? Excuse me. It was Wednesday. And, you get with Mac, and you've been with Mac,
Sure.
Mac is Mac. It's just, he does all those things. He lifts heavy beer kegs over his head on a balance beam and while shooting a 1911, he does do all that stuff, but he's just as much a rocker metalhead as I am and wants to drink and have fun and say crazy things. But I think there's a disconnect at times with people because they're thinking, okay, this is cool what they're doing, but who's this guy? He doesn't necessarily belong. I'm not from the military. I'm not from tactical. I'm not from strength training. I'm not from, gun instruction or anything like that. And so it's really just more that mentality, that mindset. That's what sort of bonds everyone together. But what is important to me is to demonstrate to people what masculinity is, because it is certainly not all of the ostensible things that people claim that it is. Because I see two things on social media. One is the ostensible, ego-driven, flaunting muscle, as if that's masculinity. You cuss, you're masculine.
Just as some chick spreading her butt cheeks laying on the beach with a machine gun isn't feminine.
Exactly. But I don't follow that page like you do, so I've never seen that before.
Dick.
but there is that ostensible manhood. And then I'll see when they want to show, quote unquote, the balance, they'll say things like, when they talk about their kids, oh, these kids are so exalted and they're, I'm so unworthy to be a dad to them, or this woman I'm so unworthy. Man, cut it out. Either way, you're full of shit. Either way, you're full of shit.
You're looking for the ego stroke where I'm going to tell you, no, that's not true. You're amazing.
Yeah, exactly. You're such a great man. She's so lucky to have you, that kind of stuff. It's like, no, man. Again, it comes back to that same thing, principle. Okay. Masculinity is based on principles. It's based on certain things. Now, so the masculinity, for example, that we need right now, yes, we need the guardians and protectors. But again, everybody's having their heads soaked right now in trends. Viking stuff, whatever is the latest. Yeah, whatever's the latest thing, And no, I mean, you study the Vikings. There's not a lot, there's some cool stuff there, but there's also some wacko stuff there. Study the American Indians. There's some crazy stuff there. These are all myths, and it's great to talk about them and glean certain things, but principles are what we want. And to me, if you want to if you want to find your role as a man, if you feel like manhood has been lost in this contemporary feministic age, then I'll give you a suggested balance. Every year on Mother's Day, I'll give the same message, and I'll say, the single most powerful thing that my two eyes have ever witnessed is a mother's love for her children. You can't compare nuclear power, nature, anything in the world
Sure.
today. You lose the bond of a true mother to her children, and the world will collapse in less than 100 years without a bomb. Civilization, you can't have test tube, everybody raised by test tube in some massive bureaucratic state. Ain't gonna happen.
We'd all eat each other.
Right. Mother's love for her children, the most unconditional, powerful force in the universe. It's what keeps the world together, dude. Now, at the same time, it's the most powerless because it's a woman caring for a small child. She can't defend herself and she can't feed or provide. So, man, if you're looking for your place in the world, provide for and protect the most powerful thing in the world that keeps the world together.
Mm-hmm.
And the sex and the decorations on the wall that she does and the potpourri that she lights up the house with, that's just to keep your dick in your pants.
It's funny as you're saying this, I agree with you, but people will hear this and they'll say, oh my God, he's so sexist. He's placing women in this box. I shave my hair and I don't cook and I don't have any potpourri. Who does this guy think he is? And I think it's like, it's okay if the woman out there listening to this doesn't fit or feel she fits in that category, but to your point, that is the nature of things. Yeah, no, if we were to let them be the standard, we wouldn't have any future. Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there's no progeny. There's nothing to, there's nothing. So, yeah, I mean, I don't judge them for it. This is my personal value, but they can do whatever they want. All I know is they're not somebody I can go to war with. That's all.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I'm not going to call you for anything. You ain't going to call me. Okay? If you're offended, I don't think you're offended because of what I said. I think you're offended because of something deeper. I'm just highlighting something deeper, a question you still can't answer because it's hard to escape a few thousand years of what civilization has always been, mm-hmm. despite the fact, because you're battling with the propaganda that you've had your head soaked in. I did a series in my coaching group this week. Coaching group, not one-on-one. Okay. This coaching group I did this week it's called World Changers, What We Need Right Now. And the part of the premise is that, if you don't understand how change happens, you're not going to experience change. So people look for change in external things. So most people are environmentalists, meaning not tree huggers. They believe change happens when physical things change. So we need new laws. We need new presidents. We need new this. We need new that.
Or
something.
I just got to get out of this relationship.
I just got to get right. Exactly.
I got to move to this new town. If I can get out of this town I grew up in, things will be different.
Things will be different. Things will change. And so, for example, when you had the last President Obama was like hope for change was his campaign. Trump is make America great again. So it's an argument over these two ideals, but nobody asked the question that's being begged, which is, are you saying that the government can make anything great? Are you saying that the government can make anything hopeful? No, it can't. These are promises. They'll do their best. It's good to have certain legislation in place. It's important, but it's not the be all and end all to where you don't have to do anything. No, you adjust based on whoever's in office. So a survivor knows what they have to do. Now, I'm not offering any political leanings here, but just the fact that anybody's thinking about it just goes to show you that I'm right, God damn it.
Whenever I hear that from people, I say, who is they? Who is this mysterious they up in the tower or behind the curtain, like from the Wizard of Oz? There is no they. There is we. There is you. There is me. There is him. And I think folks oftentimes, like just recently, we've got a very anti-gun law passed here in Illinois. And 2 points. One, people look at that and they're like, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And I usually remind them, like, these laws have been happening since before our union existed. And then 2, we elected the people that created the law. We voted them in. We allowed them to do it. So if you don't like it, go. Well, that doesn't work that way. That's exactly how
it is exactly how it works. And, I think, again, that's where you get into the blame game, where you're constantly looking for things external to you to bring about change. So whatever the ism is, feminism or anything, and I'll say this in a video I'll be posting when we're done. I think there has to be a transition from people emphasizing rights to emphasizing duty. Because everybody talks about rights, and it's been since the 50s. It's been rights, whether it's rights, civil rights, or women's rights, or then gay rights, and then pretty soon we'll get rights for goldfish at some point. It's just rights. Now, I'm sure you are, but now I'm not saying that they shouldn't have fought for particular rights. That's not the point. The point is how everybody now sees themselves. So you don't see people in terms of community. They see themselves as atomistic, radical individuals in relationship to the state. And if that's your relationship and that's your worldview, yes, you will clamor for rights. But if you're in terms of self-government, so people want to know my political leaning, I'm right of Attila the Hun. If you want to know Trump is too big government for me.
Sure.
So for me, I'm all about traditional Americanism. I would have been behind Patrick Henry going, yeah, man, I smell a rat in Philadelphia.
Did you see the post I put up yesterday on Instagram? So yesterday, April 19th, I love American history. So usually on some significant date like yesterday, I will post something. April 19th was the day that the shot around the world took place. The Redcoats marched on Concord, and
that's a loud gun.
That was a loud gun. But I just wrote a little paragraph about it as I read an excerpt from history about what happened. The Captain Parker, sitting in a tavern about to eat a delicious piece of salmon, according to history. And one of the men came in and said, the Redcoats are coming up the road at this rapid pace. They're going to be on us in minutes. So he gets the 77 militiamen to go line up in the field, which immediately was an act of aggression. Because if you're lined up, that was like doing this at that time, putting your dukes up. The Redcoats show up, tell them to disarm. They said, go f*** yourself. And then the battle ensued. But he said to them, don't fire unless fired upon. And if they want a war, let it start right here. And people don't know what that date meant. They don't look at that as something significant. So I put this post up, and the point of it was to remind people about what happened, but then to say, hey, if these people sacrificed their life, their fortune, their family, so that we today can enjoy this, like, what can you do? What little thing can you give back to the world around you, whatever it might be? Being kinder, being more thoughtful to the people around you, taking a little more time in the day to get out of bed and wash the dishes so your wife or husband doesn't have to do it, whatever. Like, these are such minuscule things.
Yeah, they add
Most
up,
people perceive that as like, hey, man, that's cool. But I had a bunch of people say, first off, the fact that you would give in to some government like today, and there's these diatribes. I left it all up there because it's funny to read. But people perceive that now our government is the same as the King of England was at that time, and that we are under this tyrannical rule, and all the laws, every law is an invasion of rights, as if our government was somehow founded so that we all could just be these free and sovereign citizens to do whatever we want. I hear this a lot. So these gentlemen were commenting on this yesterday, and I finally said, you guys, the part you're not getting is you can leave. The colonialists, they were subjects. They had no choice in the matter, which is why it got to that point. We can make laws. Donald Trump is president. Somebody voted for him. Like, it's not, you could then get conspiratorial and say it was all rigged and all that nonsense if you want to believe that. But people, to your point, is why I'm saying this, is people need to be responsible for themselves.
Yeah, it's got to go from rights to duties. And I think that's, that's a tough pill for people to swallow, because again, there's the emotional thing again. It's people get emotional and they, engaged in this diatribe as far as, trying to straighten you out, whatever they're attempting to do. But, I could go to each and every one of those people and I will find them paying Social Security. I will find them, doing all sorts of things that good statists do. Now, I myself in 92 opted out of Social Security. Mm-hmm. So I got no future from the government. Sure. I did not send my children to public school. I homeschooled them and I sent them to private religious schools. So to the best of my ability, I took what I said very seriously and applied it. So if they're out there paying Social Security and sending their kids to public schools and yet getting on your case about big government, you're full of shit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Well, the very fact that they're sitting on their telephone engaging with me through a government-funded internet that goes through telephone lines that are paid for with public funds, sitting in a house lit with electricity, paid for with public funds, it's asinine. It's ignorant at best.
No, the terms, we hear the term, like, for example, Nazism and Hitler thrown around so much that it's nobody understands what it means. But when you look at fascism itself, it's very hard for people to define. Obviously it is a form of tyranny. It has more to do with the economic side of things, in the sense that corporations and what have you still own businesses, but it is the party itself that dictates what's going to happen. So it's different from communism in the sense that it's not owning all of those things, but de facto ends up being, pretty much the same sort of thing. So, but people misinterpret a strong personality, for example, as in a Donald Trump, as, well, must mean fascism. Well, he grabs pussy, so he must be a fascist. It's like, no, he's a white male. Oh my God. He's by default, he's a fascist. No, people who are decrying things have really never read a book about the subject. They don't know history. They don't know what's going on. So they're just reaction. It's just a bunch of sound, or like a bullet bouncing off of everything, right? And that's the internet, man. Just people bouncing off of each other. But I think what the simplest solution to anything, it's long term, is instruction. And that's what I appreciate about your videos. I was going to say this earlier when you were mentioning the video you were doing. I just was going to say, and I know your listeners know this, but there is so much of that instructional element that exceeds the application just to the firearm. It is life. And you're also, overt about that. It's not like you're hiding it. It's there. There's the life principle being engaged, and you're an excellent communicator.
Thank you.
And it's like, you could literally share some of the videos that you're doing, and it's giving a similar sort of message. When I wrote my original bio years ago for the Metal Motivation thing, I talked about restoring the foundations of Western liberty. The lost capital that built Western civilization, because we're spending that capital. If the average person can just go with a credit card, which is, there's nothing backing it, okay, to debt-based living, which is hilarious. Debt-based living. I'm going to go with this debt-based living card to a Best Buy and pick up this $350 smart TV, from off the shelf and bring it home. So how easy is that compared to getting anything, compared to getting water 200 years ago or a crop 200 years ago? You're just walking in, and that's what you do, and that's what you get. And so I'll ask people, I said, what did it take to get that smart TV to the shelf of Best Buy? What did it take?
People don't like to know that.
You start thinking of we can start backing it up to the people, the truck that brought it, to the company that made it, to the designers involved, going back to those who invented the technology, those who discovered television, and you just keep going back to get to the freaking campfire. You know what I mean? Long before flight, long before radio waves, long before anything, when there was just rock and dirt and water and birds and air. And we had nothing like this before. Yet we could go back those few thousand years and you still could have flown a plane.
Right. Everything was still here.
Right. The laws of thrust and lift were there. So the world is teeming with possibility, teeming with invention. We just need to ask, seek, and knock until the door opens, right? But we don't do that enough. But those who did paid the price, and they bring out a technology. That's what technology is. Technology is the word techne in the Greek, and it means artisan, craftsman. Like in the Septuagint of the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament, when Moses was describing the guys who would work on the tabernacle, all the handiwork in gold and wood, they were excellent craftsmen. It called them technes, craftsmen, artisans. And what do you call new technology? It is state of the art. Right. So technology is not this. This thing and this microphone is not technology. These are manifestations of technology. Technology is not seen. Technology is when you create visible things with invisible means. That's what technology is. So whether it's writing a book, to designing a gun, to creating televisions, this is all technology. But there's a very painful, arduous, multi-millennial process of getting us from the wheel and the campfire to walking in with a credit card to spend money you don't have to pull a plastic smart TV off the shelf and take it home. And when you don't understand that that's what came behind all of this, you bear no responsibility to it. And no sense of duty.
The same for the people that live in our country and many other what happened on the 19th of April, 1775, sparked every republic around our globe.
Right.
We hear it from Europeans constantly. Oh, you arrogant Americans. And how many billions of dollars do arrogant Americans raise to support other countries? Everything you just mentioned, I have a speech I give to school children about this. Flight, modern medicine, the computers we're talking on, TVs, radio, microphones. Like it's absurd amount. And to your point, most of the men and women that created all of those things had hard lives where they lost their families or fortunes pouring themselves in. The Wright brothers, they lived in a freaking shed building their airplanes. And we enjoy, I every time I fly, which is once a month or so, I always am like grateful. Like I get to fly to the edge of space at almost the speed of sound and land safely and play on my phone while doing it, listening to a recorded book on tape or watching a movie or whatever, urinating in the sky and being fed hot food. And people are complaining like there's not enough leg room.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think we have to be reminded of these things for that sense of obligation, that sense of duty, the sacredness of things. So, because, like we said, we're a long way from the campfire and the founding of the wheel. But throughout all of this technology that's been created throughout the centuries and the millenniums, throughout all that time, the one thing that was true and was always there, the people are no longer here anymore, but one thing that's always been there is the principles. And that's the key. Somebody had to discover the principles of flight, thrust, lift, etc. Somebody had to discover the principles of electricity. So if electricity was not as sure as 2 + 2 = 4, we would not wire our homes with it. Mm-hmm. If electricity was just like, it worked 85% of the time, but 15% of the time, for no reason, it could just blow the to your house.
Right, right.
We would not wire our homes with electricity. You know what I mean? So we do it. So we always say user error, correct? You know, when the plane crashes, user error. And kudos to that woman Navy pilot who landed that Southwest flight the other day.
Oh, yeah, that's crazy.
Oh, what a badass chick she is. But the point is that until we realize the wealth that we've been given and the fact that what we enjoy right now is we are spending the capital that was given to us by previous generations. Mm-hmm. Their capital, intellectually, spiritually, physically, technology, it's their capital they gave us, and we are dropping the ball, bro.
Burning through it.
We are dropping the ball. We are burning through the spending it like it's daddy's money. Mm-hmm. And so we have to now do what? What's our responsibility now? To fight on Instagram? You can't be that lame. Please tell me you're not that lame. You know, our responsibility now is to restore that capital. We got to restore that capital, man. We can't do, it's like one scholar wrote, he called it larceny in the heart. And he was talking about the inflationary state. There's a lot of people want to talk a great game about the inflationary economy, right? The government doesn't produce anything. It raises, government is capital. It just takes it. Mm-hmm. You know, statists are capitalists. They might say they don't like capitalism, but they're capitalists. It's just they get their money from taxation and inflation. Mm-hmm. Well, from inflating the money supply. So everybody's a capitalist in that regard. But if you want to decry, the amount of debt that America has, very hard to do when you yourself are debt-based. So, the larceny is in our own hearts. So we got to deal with it here and now. So we have to apply these things. Just like you said, the little things, help your wife out with something, make the bed, do this with your kids, participate in, some of the meetings that you do, for legislation and things going on in your city, being a leader, being a representative, et cetera. All of the multiplicity of things that you can do. Because realize, man, if you're going to be a true American, you got to understand where the initial buffer is. The most important thing is the lesser magistrate, not the greater. Right? You can talk all day long about Washington, D.C., but it's really your own local government, your own governor, your own whatever, because that's going to be your first buttress against federal tyranny. It's like, so why, like I'm wearing my back the blue hat on. Just a prayer for the 2 deputies shot in Florida. But if you understand that when the full tyranny will have fully arrived when local police become federalized. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Once you federalize the whole system, that's when tyranny arrives in full force. So you got to realize that, man, what you have going on locally, whether police or judges or civic officials, all of that stuff, all of that is your first buttress against the greater magistrate. So always think in terms of lesser magistrates. But then you can think in terms of that and bring it all the way back to your own home. And people have lost sight of that importance of the family. So I call it my trailer park aristocracy. It's not that I live in a trailer park, and it's not that it's an actual aristocracy, but I'm practicing the principles of aristocrats in the sense that I understand the importance of property and family and all of that. It costs, the top 1% that everybody hates. Well, there's a reason why they don't send the kids to the same school that you do. There's a reason why they're not marrying off their kids to you. There's a reason why divorce is so costly for them. You want to read a book that'll dig new furrows in your brain? Read the book called Family Wealth. I believe it's James Hughes. But he's a consultant to the top 1% families.
Okay.
And he talks about, he has this whole section on I would call it the trustee family, but he mentions the family constitution. So there's certain families, massive, whether they're banking families or what have you. Sure. But they have yearly family meetings. And there are elders of the family, and there is a written family constitution with their plan for their house for umpteen generations.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think like that.
No.
The average person is very atomistic, very individual. They don't know their grandmother's name. It's just grandma. And then when they're 18, they're going to get out of the house, maybe go to college and live their life and follow the Grateful Dead or what the hell people do nowadays, and just, and then
They're
do whatever.
Gone, by the way.
Well, no, because my son did it for a while.
The point you're making, I think a lot of people might listen to that and think, wow, those Vanderbilts and those people have nothing to do with me. The same principle is what we talked about when we started the conversation here. Guys like you, Pat, myself, all of the men that work with me, the men you surround yourself with. I'm saying men because that's what we're talking about here. I don't surround myself with losers. Mm-hmm. And now if there's people that are on the loser path and they come to me for advice, I'll give it to them 2 or 3 times. And if they keep coming back to me and they keep going to Loserville, I'll say, hey man, I got nothing for you. I can't tie my hip to you and make you do anything. You must do it. And so those families are doing what you talked about to begin with. They have principles that take them to the place that they want to be. And if you are surrounding yourself with good men with positive principles that are guided by those principles, that live those principles, that breathe them, that realize I'm fallible, I will, but not, I'll keep moving on. And these guys around me are going to hold me accountable because they're not shitheads. They're not cowards. They're not afraid to tell me like it is.
Right.
And so it's on a more localized level, just so people that some of the guys that listen might tune out to that thinking, how does that apply to me? I'm not going to have a $1 billion empire.
Well, exactly. That's why I use the term trailer park aristocracy, because I care about my great grandchildren. That's it. So if that's why it applies. It applies in the sense that I'm saying, okay, I need to think long term. I need to think in terms of family, and I want my family to think in terms of family. That this is the house of Ortiz, and we have a vision, and we have a responsibility to help restore the capital of Western civilization. So what's our contribution going to be? And so they would, in the elite families, everybody would have to submit every year, every family member, they would have to submit like banking information, job information, where they live, contacts, important contacts that they had. Mm-hmm. Because the family considered all of that capital. Mm-hmm. In case this corporation that the family owns in Germany has to get a little substation down in Beaumont, Texas, well, they just happen to have a family member who's in tight with the mayor of Beaumont. They want to know, you know what I mean? So regardless of whether the reasons are nefarious or whatever, it's just they are protecting their house. They are protecting their capital. They are protecting their whatever it is. So what I'm saying is, yeah, you do the same thing. If you say, well, these things don't have a whole lot to do with me, well, then, first of all, why? So, well, because I don't have billions of dollars. Okay, but what do you have? Do you have anything that's equal to or greater than billions of dollars? I think you do. You're a working agent born in Western civilization with a responsibility to restore that shit. That's worth a hell of a lot more than billions of dollars. So the onus is even more on you because you have something greater to protect than billions of dollars. And your family and your personal life plays a role in protecting this country. Who wants to see this country go to hell? Who wants to see a dark future for this country? I sure don't.
All right.
If we go, who's going to stand up? Who's going to be the beacon of light? Who? Nobody else has what we have in our history. Nobody. It's the greatest country that's ever existed, period. Mm-hmm. Period. Does it have its problems?
Argues that has never spent even 10 minutes studying the history of the globe.
No.
It's funny. I'll have somebody recently commented to me. You mentioned a minute ago calling Trump a Nazi. Some son of a bitch. Go look at the tens of millions of bodies in mass graves across Europe from 2 world wars. Like, you have no idea. So you cry because there's a police shooting you don't feel was justified. And I'm not making light of that, but people fixate on that, forgetting that there's literally tens of millions of people whose lives were snuffed out from real tyranny.
Real tyranny, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have, it's, I remember taking my daughter when she was 16 to Washington, D.C. That's what she wanted to do for her birthday.
Cool.
This is like January 27th, bro. You know how cold it is in Washington, D.C.?
I live in Chicago.
So we're freezing our asses off, man. But she's right now, completing her degree in history. So cool. That's just the way she is. And so we're walking around and I'm going by the FBI building and all these other, buildings. And I'm just sitting there and just pounding on that marble and looking at all the people walking by, briefcases and ties and dresses. And I'm thinking, what? 90% of these people work for the government. I'm thinking, Republican or Democrat, ain't nobody reducing the size of this place.
Yeah.
Ain't going to happen. Ain't no red tie or blue tie. Ain't nobody voting anything that's going to reduce the size of government. That's it. You pick your poison, man. Which one you want to charge? Now, of course, Trump is a bit of an X factor because he's not from the establishment. And I think that's what's driving everybody crazy. I mean, the way you know that there's an X factor with Trump is just because of how many conservatives hate him. Because it's not business as usual. But that doesn't. I'm not whitewashing anything he does. I'm just saying that that's the reality. Is that it's very apparent that the state itself is a little rocked. Mm-hmm. Because let's face it, man, government is a great gig, dude. It's a great racket.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You go back to, it's very, to me, reminiscent of the mafia in a lot of ways. And, I grew up in New York and when we were little, we'd get baby. My mom's best friend's dad was head of the Teamsters. And so there was always these well-dressed guys around,
Okay.
And so we get, she dated one guy who was a Colombo family associate or whatever. But everything when I grew up in New York initially for the first 12 years of my life, everything was either owned by Jewish folks or the mafia or the Rockefellers. Mm-hmm. That was pretty much it. Mm-hmm. So you knew what was mob owned. Well, the mob, you got 5 families who will go to war with each other over turf. They will go to the mattresses and kill each other. But if you wanted to really defeat the other family, why don't you just reveal them to be a mafia family? Well, no, because that would expose La Cosa Nostra, this thing of ours. You don't expose the racket. You can go to war over who's in charge. Never expose the racket, though, because this is what keeps us all paid. So they'll fight each other, shoot each other in the head, but they'll never expose that they are also a part of this racket. Government is racket. And you'll learn that, only a few people can really keep their principles. You take a guy like Ron Paul. You listen to a speech by Ron Paul in 1975. It's the exact same thing he's saying in 2012. You know what I mean? The exact same thing, broken record, on and on and on. Not many people like that. They get into the system. I was listening to the Senate hearings with Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook the other day. And I got nothing against the Ted Cruz or whatever, but he was laying into Zuckerberg pretty hard.
He looked like a real ass.
Yeah, he did, but the way he was doing it, I'm thinking, that is so political right there. And then afterwards, I realized, he's up for election. Mm-hmm. So he's posturing and positioning himself. You know what I mean? So it's like, dude, it's just a game, bro. And it's a dangerous game because there's a lot of power and money involved. But at the same time, man, it's like, well, damn, dude, that's the nature of the American system. That's what it's become. I love it. It's still I love it because I love the people, and I love it because I love the land, mm-hmm. and what we do with it and what we make of it. That's the bread and butter. That's what I'm protecting. That's where my patriotism is.
For sure.
And the fact it's in this shared community. But I also know this shit will go to hell in a handbasket if you think the whole future is dependent upon politics. It's not. The less you govern yourself, the more you'll be governed by others. And that's your primary argument for self-government. And so self-government really means something. It means you got to have to really govern some stuff. Regulate your life, because government will multiply regulation out the ass. It will license you at every level if it can. It's amazing. You and I, as you probably know this, you and I right now are probably in violation of at least 3,000 laws that we don't even know about.
Maybe 4,000 for me.
Maybe 4,000 for you. So it's like, you know, that's the nature of bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is slow moving. And so you can't depend on these things. That's what people do. They say, well, when the environment gets just right, circumstantially, then things will happen. It's like saying, I'll tell people, you know, one of the most paramount things that I see stop people is what I would call fatalism. And I would set fatalism over against determination. Fatalism is the idea that somehow things will happen. When they say stupid things like, well, it'll all work out.
Yeah. Everything happens for a reason.
Everything happens for a reason. Or I don't know if people will ask me stuff like, CJ, what am I supposed to do with my life? Supposed to do?
Whatever you want.
What am I, God? How do I know?
Well, first off, go get your checkbook.
Exactly. Yeah. It's gonna be more than $20 an hour. I guarantee that. But they'll, you know, they have this sense of fate that somehow, in other words, if you don't have a plan, I'll tell them this, if you don't have a plan for a particular area of your life, then you're a fatalist, because you believe that circumstances will eventually create what can only happen by your own effort. And so they put that off. They don't plan. So they're not deterministic. So again, they don't see themselves as governors in the world. If I say the word government to the average person today, the first picture in their mind is probably the Capitol building or something in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
Say the word government to somebody in 1835. What do they see in their mind? They don't see Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So what did government mean to them? Government to them meant self-government. Even the local government was held at bay. You know what I mean? So it's we are in that post-Civil War mindset. You know, we're children after the war between the states. And so we're raised, and the state will raise you to protect its interests much like a mother will, right? What was the one thing you couldn't rank on in the schoolyard as kids? Mom. You can say what you want about my dad, right? Say what you want about me. Say what you want about my brother. Don't you say shit about my mother.
Sure.
Why? Because that's my origin. That's the one who raised me. And so again, try to touch the state. Try to criticize government provision on any level, whether it's right or left. And sure enough, man, people will get antsy because the state raises you like a mother to protect her interests. So it's a mindset we've got to break free of. That's what true liberty is. Liberty is the result of the application of law at the individual level, not anything else.
Self-regulating.
Yeah, people want freedom. You don't want freedom, man. You don't want that kind of freedom. Freedom is the end result of responsibility. That's what freedom is. And so that's what we would define then maturity. Maturity is responsibility. And so that's what you raise your kids for, right? To be self-governing, responsible, moral agents. And when they don't do that, you got to keep doing it. So, you know, that's the point. You raise them to be responsible. And that's what people have forsaken.
I learned so much in my time in politics. I was the vice chairman of the Republican Party here.
Wow.
And I would view myself as more of a libertarian, but in order to...
me too.
It doesn't mean anything here. But I've run sheriff campaigns, state's attorney's campaigns, state representative campaigns, state senator campaigns, helped with gubernatorial campaigns, raised hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 10 years. And I've been drugged through the mud, I've been called a political insider, a criminal. I never was paid one red cent for any of this. You know, if anything, it cost me time away from family, time away from work, cost me tons, not just financially, but in time, which is more important than anything. And one time I was on the front page of the newspaper. I had been arrested once as a young man, and an opponent of a guy that I was running a campaign for dug this up. I never tried to hide it. I could have had the records expunged or sealed. I never bothered because I was acquitted in a court. And so I was so young, I just never thought about it. Well, this guy was a lawyer. He crafted this story that basically made me sound like I was like Jack the Ripper mixed with Adolf Hitler all in one. And the newspaper thought, this is great, we'll run with it. So they got a picture of me, the state's attorney, county board chairman, a couple of state representatives, the party chairman at this fundraiser, and we're all, drinking wine and laughing, and just like, then you read it and it's like, oh, look, they're all like these dirty insiders. And it was so comical when you knew the truth. And so the reporter asked me, like, well, how did you get there? Like, what payback was there? How did I get there? Get where? It's a job of servitude. There's no payoff to this. And then, like, what was comical, the more I thought about it, I said to them, she goes, well, there's got to be some reason. Nobody just gets where you were. I go, you know how I got there? I just stepped into it. And that's like how I found, like, most everything in life. Like, when I hear people think of, and there's some truths to somebody got put into office by the powers that be. Right. But still, individuals sitting down, me and you are going to sit down and figure out who to get elected, or me and you are going to sit down and figure out how we can impact the world in a meaningful way. Then we apply action to it. And it's people that don't understand how simple that is, think there must be more to it. His dad must have gone to college with somebody to... No, actually not at all. A poor kid from the suburbs just said, I'll do it. And then people say, oh, I don't know how to do it. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about, so let him do it. Yeah. And that's literally, it's that simple. Yeah.
Yeah. Local politics has got to be like that. Yeah. I mean, it's always going to be the favoritism. I mean, you go back to the Bush-Kerry presidential race.
But even at national level politics, it comes down to somebody sitting down and saying, I trust his opinion, so I'm going to follow him.
Sure.
Some party leader, some money man. It's still individuals taking initiative, because somebody could say, you know what, I don't trust that guy, or I don't like his candidate, so I am going to muster more energy, more resources, more thought, more people that feel like I do, and will suppress and win.
Right.
It's the same as business. It's the same in personal relationships. There's always like one guy in the group or gal in the group that's the leader, because they step into that spot.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and politicians are looking for that. They look for that help. They need that support. Trump had to spend money. If it's all a rigged thing, well, then why spend any money? It's just have the election, and the guy who they picked is going to be voted in. So
people still have to show up and cast a ballot.
Yep.
Which I only tell that story because people listen to what we're talking about, and it's all the same. Whether you're running a motivational podcast, whether you're building a rock band, whether you're pastoring a church, governing a state, building your body, whatever. It's the same things.
Yeah, it is. It is the exact same thing. And again, going back to, kind of the motif of what I've tried to say when it comes to we have to answer the question, where does authority lie? Because authority will tell us what to do. And authority is found, as I would argue, in principle. That's where authority is. I can never outdo or govern or change 2 + 2 = 4. Never going to happen. Never going to change the laws of electricity. Never going to change anything. So whatever the principles are that govern, there are principles that govern all those guns that I see behind you, right? How they work and how they're designed. It's all based on principle. So you get principle at every level. The problem is that we have a bunch of substitutes and not a lot of representatives. So that's why everybody's so loud. The louder you are is the evidence that you don't have authority in your life. There's none, because you have to constantly put out the bravado in order to establish your position. You have to be loud.
That makes sense.
And so remember when you went to school as a kid, and when a substitute teacher showed up, that was like goof-off day, man. You know what I mean? You knew you were going to like watch a movie or do some handout crap or whatever, because that teacher could not continue. So let's say your regular teacher is Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. Jones is sick, and all of a sudden this lady you've never seen before named Miss Smith comes in, and you're like, cool, substitute, goof off day. Miss Smith starts by saying, okay, as you realize, Mrs. Jones is not here. She's not feeling well. I am coming in to take her place. Now, You don't know me, but I know Mrs. Jones very well. In fact, I have been living with her for the past 5 years. I know everything she does. I know her blinks. I know her mannerisms. I know everything she's taught. I could recite it off the top of my head. So we are going to continue with the curriculum exactly as if she was here.
Shit.
And to use the old phrase, if you've seen me, you've seen Mrs. Jones. Because I'm not here to substitute. I'm here to represent. And because I represent the authority, I have authority. You only have as much authority as you represent principle. The moment you start substituting your ego and your manipulations and your moodiness and your anger and your strife and your jealousy and your bitterness and your rage and your insecurity and all that other horse shit, the more your authority declines and the more you have to rely upon all of these other ostensible, surface, fleshly, crying and whining and babying and all that stuff you've got to rely on because you don't have any authority. That's your problem, man.
Or woman.
Or woman. One woman that's listening to the podcast.
Actually, we got quite a few of them.
Do you?
Listen. It's
girls, how are you?
It's so nauseatingly simple to me that sometimes I get frustrated, like with family or friends, when I watch them doing the same stupid shit. And I have to sometimes be cognizant of, okay, man, I know personally it took me, and I one of my uncles, side note, I remember one time as a young man, I worked with him. I was probably 18 and he was my age now. And I thought he had everything figured out. He had a good business. He paid me on time. He had a nice home, a nice car. And I remember we're sitting eating lunch on a construction site. And I said, man, I can't wait till I'm your age. And I got it all sorted out. And he's eating a sandwich and he's laughing and food falls out of his mouth. And I'm like, why is that funny? He's like, you dumb son of a bitch. I'll crawl into my grave, trying to sort it out. But the point I was going to make is I try to remind myself, like, it wasn't that long ago that the things that are not a challenge to you now were a challenge. Yeah. And there's things that the things that are challenges to me now, I take comfort in knowing the same steps that help me overcome the stuff that I've now mastered will help me master those things. And then at some point it will be shit. Now I can't get up off the couch without help. I'll have new challenges, whatever they may be, or my eyesight fades or something. But it's frustrating though when people that are close to us don't get oftentimes I've never understood when people say love yourself. When I was a young man, my mom would say, you don't love yourself. You're doing that thing and it shows me you don't really care about yourself. Well, what does that mean, Mom?
I love myself. Mom, I just did that in the bathroom.
Right. But I never understood what that meant. It never made enough sense to me. And my teaching style is make something as simple as possible. Like I have friends that teach firearms and they use all kinds of big fancy words, which I understand the vernacular. And I'm not preaching against big fancy words, but I think sometimes guys want to make things so complicated because of ego, because they want to make people understand like how much they know or how much they've sorted out. When in reality, like with a gun, point it at the thing you want to make a hole in and make a hole in it. And you can describe like a million different ways of doing it, but like, how did you get there? Step into it. No, but how did you do it? Step into it. Or how did you get the muscles? Go, and not that I have them, go pick the weight up over and over again, and then they come. Like, it's not hard, but you probably, like me, have volumes of books. My dad has thousands and thousands of books. And it's funny, a friend of mine recently went to, I'm kind of rambling, but there's a point. A friend of mine recently went to Tony Robbins, and he'd never been into any of that kind of stuff. He's kind of a negative kind of dude. And if he hears this, I'm sorry, but it's the truth. So he starts sending me stuff from the event. And it's all stuff you and I have heard 5,000 times from 5,000 different people. So after the fact, we had a little powwow, and I said, hey, I appreciate that you've had this epiphany. It's all good stuff. I said, I know this stuff. It's not like I don't need to hear it, so I'm not saying like I'm good, but that's not Tony Robbins. Those are principles described by Tony Robbins. These are laws of nature that exist regardless of who puts a trademark to it, or W. Clement Stone, Napoleon Hill,
James Allen,
these Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi. All of them describe these.
Pat McNamara.
Sure, he's got his isms. I've got my isms. You've got yours.
Gas it up and burn it down.
That was.
I live by that.
In Ephesians, I believe.
Book of Opinions, 5:1.
But that I think is like we look. It's like if something's so simple, we look beyond it. Like, well, that can't be it. Because then I'm stupid if I can't just see this simple thing. So instead, it must be complicated. Yeah. Like I get constantly, I can't fix this shooting error, and I listen to the speaks. Okay, I can't. Got it. What else do we got? And then we start talking about it. And it's usually the most minuscule thing, but they just are convinced that they don't have the answer because they don't believe that they do. And it's it's this belief system, which, as I just was talking about this, I kind of made my point that it's people hear these like, well, what's the principle? When I was a kid, Dad would play Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich on tape in the car. Right. And I remember I'd listen to it, and I always waited for him to say, like, what product you had to sell or what job you had to get so that you could make all this money. And I asked my dad, I'm like, he's never gotten to the point. And Dad's like, well, what do you mean? Like, well, I'm like, do you sell insurance? Do you, like, fly airplanes? Like, how do you get rich? And I didn't, this was a 10-year-old, but we assume that there's something outside of us that we can grab onto and latch onto, and that's that self-love thing. That you're actually very perceptive at 10 years old, because not many people know this. Think and Grow Rich was really a sales piece. Yeah.
It was written to sell his Laws of Success series, which is a much larger, more in-depth. So that's why it never really kind of gives you, I mean, it gives you some stuff to do, but it doesn't really show you, well, where's the real, because basically, I did a series called Think and Grow Rich. No, what was it? Think and Grow Poor, Work and Grow Rich.
It makes sense.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah, I get it.
But going back to your other point, which I think is an important one, because this is something that I'll say often. I'm grateful, as I'm sure you are, for the appreciation that people will express, whether they tell you personally, they write to you, hey, your course, what you said or whatever has made such a difference. And I appreciate that, all of it. It can get a little out of hand because we live in a celebrity-driven culture.
You're saying out of hand where you begin to...
it's too much about me or you.
What I did.
Yeah. You know what I mean? In other words, what they're saying is CJ, I've had people say CJ for president. I've had them say... Sure, I get that. I get it a lot. Jesus Christ. You're like, Jesus, bro. Stuff gets a little out. And or not even that sort of, hyperbole, but just going too much on about me. So a long time ago, I say this all the time. I'll tell people, listen, please don't confuse the message with the messenger. Mm-hmm. Okay? Don't confuse those two things. Because if there's anything that I have ever said to you that has made a difference in your life or changed something, then there's no way I own it.
Right on.
So I'm not going to go back, for example, to my first grade teacher and hug her and say, thank you for inventing 2 + 2 = 4.
Right on.
No, she's a messenger. Mm-hmm. I exalt the message. So I'm only here to help communicate. I'm helping the world with the long hair and the targeted audience and the Instagram and YouTubes and stuff.
You're connecting with people that appreciate who you are.
Yeah, the door that I come through. And so, but it's all just there to deliver the principles, deliver the messages. I prefer to work myself out of the job. I prefer you not depend on me. I prefer you go be a metal motivator where you are.
I'm sure there's from time to time people think, who's this guy?
Oh, sure, all the time. Oh my God.
People say, like, that don't understand my sense of humor. You know, I'm crass, I'm grabbing ass and dick and ball jokes and stuff. Right. And there's people that say, occasionally folks will say, you know, if you could learn to watch your mouth and speak with respect, you'll get a lot farther.
Right.
And the first thing that comes to mind is go yourself. But and I will usually send a person like that a private message. Look, I appreciate where you're coming from. I'm not talking to you. There's somebody out there that speaks to you, and that's not me. And I could clean my vocabulary up, but that's still not, you know, that's not who I am and what I'm trying to do. So
and if you clean it up too much, then you're going to have a whole host of people that don't want to follow you anymore because you're too Mr. Rogers.
I totally am, in the last 5 years, just to talk about myself. When I started this training company a number of years ago, it was to train. And I started to realize I've got 6 younger brothers who would probably tell 100 terrible stories each about me. So I'm not pretending like I was some wonderful big brother, but I'm the oldest boy of 11 kids. And so, like, if you look at my audience, it's young men, 20-something-year-old dudes. And I started realizing, like, due to what I was exposed to in my life, I have an ability to communicate to these young guys in a way that they need to hear something. And not patting myself on the back, I'm okay with saying I'm an idiot that is 1,000 times, and so will you. We're like a lot of guys in my life that were mentors. That's like a non-manly, non-educated thing to say, where I could give 2 shits.
Right.
But there's a vacuum. You talked about it a minute ago, where there's all of these guys that are talking to that audience are telling these young men the very things they don't need to hear.
Right.
And then some of it, and I don't want to say the exact catchphrases, like Pat's gas it up and burn it down. We know what he means.
Right.
And I'm not using his, but I'm just saying, like, that right there. There's guys that say things like Nike, just do it. Well, you could just stick a needle in your arm and do it. You could just nail your buddy's girlfriend. It's back to your point. What are those principles? Like, some of these guys simplify the things where it's just about the macho bullshit.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, man, I don't give a shit. Every one of us cries at some point in our alone time. Every one of us hears a love song and remembers some heartache that tore us to shreds, and that's okay. Like,
I sure don't, but God, you sound like a
yeah, I had Air Supply on the other day when I was sleeping.
That's right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And I do think, I think you get what you teach, right? You get what you teach. And I think that, you know, part of the reason why I do things the way I do is for that right there is I want to differentiate, and this gets into my marketing stuff, but I want to differentiate myself from others. And so to do it as the Metal Motivator obviously is a more surface differentiation. It's an effective one. It's worked very well. But people will anticipate that a Metal Motivator is going to sound like a championship wrestler or something.
Right.
And so they're
man, Randy Savage.
Exactly. That's what they're going to do. So, but when they listen, when they start listening, they realize, well, he doesn't sound any different than whoever I could be listening to. So, but if you do pay attention to the content, there's nothing really you and I have said this entire time we've talked about motivation. You know, we're not a bunch of cheerleaders saying, you know, find your greater self and overcome the obstacles, and let's talk about the steps you need to take to achieve your goal. Those are all important things. I'm not going to demean those, but I'm talking about something much, much different. You're talking about something much, much different. Those things are included, but we're talking more about life from a life mastery. We're talking about principles to the degree that they are ethical in nature. When you start talking about saving your country and, you know, restoring the West or whatever it may be, these are things that are ethical in nature. So it's a lot more worldview oriented than you typically hear with contemporary motivational speakers. But I use motivation because that's what people understand.
Yeah.
So it's just the packaging and all this, just the way to get that message out there but it's no different than yours. It's just we're both just trying to restore these essential values, the fundamentals that we know will. It's not perfect. We're not saying it's perfect, but these are the values that we believe will restore. And I think, I was thrilled when you said so many of the people who listen and go to your courses are young guys. That really, really thrilled my heart, man. Because, an older guys, it's just a matter of time before they're put in the ground. But you get a young man, head turned around, life turned around, man, you saved an entire life and everybody that he or she is going to impact. And that's what makes this so important. And so I do it through what I do. You do it through guns. Yes, you want to create these, proficient carry firearm people. Is that the industry lingo, bro?
Sure, close enough.
Gun carrying. But you have so much more driving you, and which is part of what gives Carry Trainer this very unique distinction. So and I want to just say this to you as someone who does branding, as someone who, this is what I do. I create brands and things. And, your stuff is so thought out. And again, it's easy because you're a natural in terms of as I said, the communication aspect, not like Ryan Seacrest gift of gab. But man,
I don't know how to take that.
well, you're not that, so be glad.
Okay.
But more the man of conviction, communicator, more the person who has the champion who rises up for a cause kind of thing.
I appreciate that.
I
will say that the reason that I feel the conviction is I've watched the ramifications in my own life for all of the stupid shit. I've had handcuffs put on me. I've watched my family drive off as they said they were done with me. I've had a home foreclosed on. I've had negative bank account balances and had people say, I'm done with you. You made the same stupid decision too many times,
Right. Well, there's that old quote from, I forget who it was. I don't know, it was Cicero or whoever, but one of the rhetoric guys. But he said, it's written, it says, when Achilles, whatever, spoke, everyone said, how well he speaks. When Demosthenes got up and spoke, they said, let us march against Philip. So it's, is the message that we're sharing causing action? Mm-hmm. Is it? And I think we've said a lot of things in this interview where it's a lot of conviction. It's a lot of opening up heart and saying, a lot of guys may be saying, well, on this point, yeah, he got me on that one. Or on this point, yeah, Mickey got me on that one. You know what I mean? I need to rethink some things and change some things and get myself in the game and stop focusing on what the next tattoo I'm going to get is and how, what beard oil I use. And
none of that stuff's wrong, right?
It's not wrong. No, it's just don't lead with it.
Head down at night. Is that the stuff that's going to bring you peace, happiness? Are you going to be able to sleep well because of those things? If the answer is yes, go get more of that shit.
Yeah, sure. Well, when people ask me all the time, dude, where's your tattoos? You're the Metal Motivator, man. Where's all your tattoos? I said, listen, no ink will touch this skin unless I mishandle a Sharpie.
Talking with you and what you just said, and I appreciate your comments. One of the reasons I wanted to interview you was the same, our like-mindedness. But you're far more educated in many ways than I am. You've got, you don't need to say that. I mean, it's true. You've got a great depth of knowledge in a lot of things that are beyond my scope. I'm a simpleton in a lot of ways, but as you were just talking about the application of steps to get you to where you want to go, like you said, that's all important. But what I kept thinking about as you were saying that is it all starts with, like, if we said it all starts with, people would come up with like 50 different things: desire, purpose, a goal. And and I don't know if there's a specific answer, but like where I start is, what are you thinking about? What are you feeding yourself? Like, we could go to the extremes of I'm stupid, I'm not good enough. Like, those are just, because they make sense to people. Like, you hear that in your head, or is it just the simple things like, another day, Friday at least. And later on, I'm going to get some beers in me and like, and then that's the way life works out.
That's an awesome Friday.
Right. But I don't think people take the time, and I'm guilty of it too, to pay attention to what they're saying to themselves and understand how that actually affects the course and trajectory of our life over time. Our subconscious, I know you know this, I'm not preaching to you, but our subconscious doesn't know fact from fiction. It doesn't know. This is how the technology you're talking about comes to be. There was no airplane till some dude in his mind said, I can create this. And his conscious mind said, well, that's just bullshit. I can't do it. But some part of him said, yeah, I can. I'm going to sort this problem out until I make it real. And I think too often when we look at goals, we start to think about, okay, there's complicated stuff. I need to get this graph where I can look at like my 2-year goal, my 5-year goal, my 20-year financial plan, my retirement plan, my plan for my grandchildren's college tuition. What about my goal to just be happy tomorrow? Like sometimes I think if we can just do that, and then you get power, like my own personal life, when I realized, shit, I really actually can change my life.
Yeah.
And then you begin to grow on that, right? Like courage begets courage, fear begets fear. And we just feed ourselves what we want. You quoted a scripture a minute ago. Since you quoted a scripture, I'm going to quote a scripture. I had to look it up. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, and I'll just paraphrase here, pure, lovely, and good. If there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. My mother covered our house in scripture. She'd write stuff, put it on the fridge and such. And as a kid, you'd see these things, or as an adult, and you don't think about it. But like how simple, that was Paul, right? That wrote that, Philippians. How simple. Think about good shit. That's all he was saying. Just don't think about your anger, your fact that your knee got blown out in the high school game and you didn't make the NFL. Think about good shit. And people hear that and they're like, well, that's too simple. No, it's not. Well,
you make a great point. Like same writer in Ephesians says, do not let the sun go down upon your wrath.
Yeah, man, like,
how many times do we violate that?
Yeah, laying in bed angry. My wife and I had an argument that lasted way too long, and the other day we made up and we both laughed at each other, both teary-eyed, because we were so angry. And it was like, how freaking stupid that we waste our life. And in the end, like, for what? Because I was right.
It's hard to escape humanity, and that's again, it goes back to the issue of principle. Principle has been around since those early days we talked about of wheel and campfire, because principles transcend. I had a little debate.
Hey gang, this is the Carry Trainer editor. Mickey's interview went over 3 hours, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here. But come back next week for the second Higher Line podcast and watch part 2 of the Metal Motivator interview. Catch you later. Think good things and have a great week.
Visit our website, carrytrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., Carry Trainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@carrytrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@carrytrainer.com or carrytrainer.com.